All right. Thanks again. Here we are, the Gill Athletics Track and Field Connections podcast. I am going to put a disclaimer out there before we even get to our introduction of today's guest. So, this podcast is it's real humbling for me. I get to interview coaches from around the world. Some of them are dear friends of mine that I've coached with and coached against and done business with since I've been here at Gill, and those are amazing. Some guests are people that I've never met at all, and we're so humbled. I'm so humbled that they join us and talk about their journey. Today's guest it's actually a notch above some of the coaches we've had here. I've known, and I would call them dear friends. This guest today, he's a brother. He is my brother. Family's not always blood, and I have been just so blessed in my life to be able to call this guest today an actual brother of mine, a family member of mine. I love him to death. So help me welcome today's guest from Cal Poly-SLO, Mr. Chris Baptista. Bap, how are you, sir?
Good, Mike. I'm humbled for that introduction as well. Thinking about, I've read through that list of people you've interviewed on here, and just to be a part of your show, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, so I have to apologize right off the bat, right? Because inevitably there are going to be some inside jokes that we just maybe legally we can't explain, and then others that maybe we just forgot how it even started, and it just is what it is, man. So you have got an opportunity here to listen to, again, just a great friend of mine, a great coach. We're going to learn about his journey today, and has a fascinating aspect of his career, just like many of you do, that I think it'll be important to explore and hopefully bring value to you today as you listen along on today's episode. So, Bap, where do we even begin? Let's make sure we're honoring your journey. You do have an amazing journey, coaching some amazing athletes, some great mentors in your life that we have to make sure that we bring to light here as well. Let's get in our Wayback Machine here. And where does track and field actually start for you?
Well, from a coaching standpoint, I think it began when I was at UAB. I was a pre-optometry major, and Rod Tiffin was the coach that recruited me to UAB. And after a year, he left and went to Auburn. We didn't have a coach there for about a year and a half, well, maybe a year. Scott Strand took over as a head coach. He was a distance guy, and had a graduate assistant who was more of a sprint-based coach. So the other jumper and I really started, watching video, reading books, and just got to a point where for us, it made the most sense that I think like the physics, the science aspect of things made a lot of sense for me once I started looking at it from a biomechanical aspect. And so
well, let's put a pin there. Let's back up even further from that, because I think even your athletic experience plays into it. You're mentioning UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham. However, you aren't from Alabama. So let's take it even a further step back, and let's talk about where you grew up and how you even got involved to participate in track and field.
Yeah, so I grew up in Carruthers, a little town outside of Fresno. Started competing probably in 5th or 6th grade, and basically it was basketball, football, track. Kind of went through 3 sports. Being in a small school, had that opportunity to be competing in all 3 sports. Did a little bit of baseball as well, but fell into track a little bit more because I was afraid of the ball. I didn't like getting hit by the baseball. I took a few beaners playing when I was 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and ended up in high school freshman year just being a pinch runner, and again kind of showcasing my speed from that standpoint, and then just walked away from baseball completely. And what's funny was
I was so afraid of the ball when I played baseball. I never even hit. I was a 0 batting average. That's how afraid of the baseball I was. So as you gravitated towards track and field, what events? You said you had some speed. Were you a sprinter, a jumper? What did you end up kind of focusing on?
Yeah, I did the 100, 200, long jump, triple jump, almost all throughout my career. Did a little bit, kind of moved towards the 400 a little bit more junior, senior year in high school. Ran on DMR and some relays in college, just because I kind of stagnated when it kind of came to a speed standpoint. But yeah, I was 1, 2 long and triple jump, with long and triple jump really being my emphasis.
And where did you like, how did your career go as far as high school? Were you able to compete? We know you competed at UAB. Did you compete somewhere before that? I'm really like softballing these questions up. I know this history so well, folks. This may be the hardest interview I've ever done, because I could write this. I could be like, hey, so Bap's here. Let me tell you his journey. So Bap, where did you go after high school to compete?
So after high school, I went to Shasta College. The only school I applied to was University of Oregon. I wanted to be a Duck. Who doesn't, right? Part of the recruiting challenge these days as well. But I wanted to be a Duck. You know, we went to the Track City International Classic every summer through youth track and field, and just walking into Hayward Field would just get like chills every time we'd walk down Agate Street and see the stadium. So I remember I didn't really have an opportunity. I was a 22-10 long jumper out of high school. So, you know, at that time, I mean, that was more than a dime a dozen. Kind of took 24 mid really to kind of get a hard look coming out of high school. So I went to Shasta JC, really more from a football perspective than it was a track perspective. Football coaches recruited me up there, and I remember calling Coach Gillespie at the time and saying, "Hey, I'm halfway to Eugene." So that was the reason why I went. You know, I loved Redding, loved Shasta area, but also in my mind, it was halfway down the road to Eugene, and let me get closer, let me showcase myself and try to make that move. Obviously it didn't happen.
I
Ended up in Alabama.
Yeah, spoiler alert. You kept the green, but changed, you know, from a Duck over to a Blazer. So how does a kid, you know, you're a sophomore in junior college at this point. How does a kid from the West Coast who has dreams of being a Duck get all the way? I mean, there wasn't much farther you could go to get to the East Coast here, but how do you get all the way to Birmingham, Alabama?
Yeah. So, you know, I started kind of promoting myself, if you would, reaching out to coaches, filling out questionnaires, just making contact. And all said and done, I mean, it really came down to two coaches that I really tried to put myself in front of. One was at what was then University of Louisiana Lafayette, just University of Louisiana, but Bush Exnader, and he had some tremendous jumpers and success there before he went to LSU. And the other was Rod Tiffin, and you know, just kind of researching Rod, seeing what he had done with Vanetta Jeffries at the time, Vanetta Flowers. I kind of felt like, hey, these are two places I'd really like to be. And then academically, it kind of fit as well. And they were, you know, probably the main two coaches that I sought after. Had a couple other offers, Division II, you know, schools that made some offers, but overall, I wanted to go Division I, compete at that level, and you know, that was the opportunity and the path.
So we're in the mid to not even late 90s, right? This is mid 90s, early 90s, mid to early 90s for you.
94.
94. Yeah. How did you specifically mentioned great people like Rod Tiffin and Bush Exnader. And by the way, if you're listening right now, this is a sneak preview. Bush Exnader is going to be on the podcast. Now, I'm not going to tell you when he's going to be on, but he and I are recording soon. But I'm so stoked because if you've been listening, if you're a regular listener here, you know Boo's name comes up almost every episode. It's the reach and the servant leadership he has in this sport he touches so many people. So I'm super excited about that. Bap, so this is 94. How does how do you know about a Boo in a Tiffin at this point, in a UAB, in a Louisiana? Like, the internet's not there, so it's not like you're doing research. Social media is not there, which you're not even on social media now. So how do you find like these are the guys that you want to coach you, and so you put your name out there and try to get recruited by them? What was your process then?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I looked at a lot of different schools. One started with schools that had pre-optometry programs, right? And optometry schools, there's 23, 25 in the country, I think, at that time. So that was the first scope, right? And then the second scope was once I started getting media guides during, back in those days, getting the media guides, looking at through the record books, looking at successes, looking at the bios to see, hey, this person out of high school did X, Y, and Z. Now they're a junior. This is what they're doing. You were able to, even at that time, through a media guide, see that development, especially if somebody was a junior or senior, because you've seen that path of their success. So that's kind of how I identified that.
I like that. That's a kind of a good lesson for recruiting. If you're thinking about what schools to look at, I kind of heard you say lenses, like, okay, here's the first lens. It has to have optometry, right? That's what I want to major in. So there's the first lens that the school has to pass. And then you did something that, I don't know. I guess I don't hang out with much of high school seniors that are trying to get recruited anymore. But you really did your research. Like you were looking at, well, what did these 5 kids jump out of high school? What did they jump freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year with this coach? And that's kind of how you evaluated that coach's coaching ability.
Yeah, and there's, what's funny is, like you said, your sneak peek having Boo on here sometime soon. He's somebody that became a mentor going through USA track and field coaching programs. And, I always sit back even to this day and think like, yeah, how did I identify that? Right. I mean, just the success he's had in helping mentor and develop coaches and write programs and everything else. I think as I look back, it helps me to kind of identify that, yeah, maybe this was just always part of my path. Right. But yeah, it was interesting just kind of how I got down to those decisions. Those were the 2 Division I schools I wanted to go to. I remember sending Boo tape, and yeah, it was like I said, in junior college went 23:10, so a little bit better than 22:10 out of high school. But even then, I think he had a couple 25, 26 foot long jumpers, and it was just kind of like, hey, thank you. So I was never really recruited, but like I said, I was recruiting him, no doubt. So, and then that opportunity happened at UAB because it was a young program. It was a distance program to start off with, and they were really just trying to move in the direction of building a track program. So that door was open.
Well, those are 2 certainly really good coaches to recruit yourself as an athlete there. So that's awesome. So you ended up going to UAB. It's a young program for the men's side, I assume, or because I thought they had been around for a little while.
Yeah, mainly cross country though. I think the school record was 21:10 when I got there in the long jump. So I had it for about a year. And then Safiso Shangway, who was one of my teammates, ended up breaking that and was a 50-foot triple jumper. And I think we had a program for about 4 or 5 years after I graduated before they cut the men's program, and it ended up being a women's only program.
So where are you in your head as far as a career? You talked about optometry and pre-optometry majors. You obviously have some kind of natural desire for coaching and I say that because of the research you did on coaches. Like that's a very coaching thing to do, is to do your research on coaches, right? So where are you? Are you still thinking optometry, or is coaching at all in your headspace while you're doing your junior and senior year at UAB?
Yeah, so like I said, earlier, that was the transition of coaching staffs, right? When Rod left to go to Auburn and Scott took over, and we had a graduate assistant, and literally it was Scott Strand and a graduate assistant. So Safiso and I started, videoing each other, like I said, reading books, and started with the most basics, the Book of Jumps, Jacoby and Fraley back in the day.
Yeah.
But, even starting to get more into some of the international coaches and reading, like I said, it just became more interesting to me. Take a triangle and a slidey pulley scale in a physics classroom, and then draw that triangle between the hip, the knee, and the ankle, and look at force production, and a light bulb just went off for me. So it was just more appealing. I just found myself more interested in reading more about biomechanics, exercise science, and decided to go down that path. And what's funny is, even at that time when I decided to move away from kind of the pre-optometry and thinking about being a doctor down the road, it was still kind of more like cardiac rehab space. It was a fitness specialist degree at UAB, so it was kind of still more cardiac rehab. Maybe the fitness realm wasn't still full-blooded coaching yet. And then as I got a little bit closer to graduating, and Brad Bowman came along and was one of my coaches my last year, and everything was different. The way we trained, the style, the quality versus quantity, the explanation of why we were doing things. And that was probably what kind of kicked me over the edge to say, hey, this is what I think I want to do.
And up to this point, are there any coaches that you are kind of patterning yourself off, whether it's a high school coach or a coach at Shasta? You mentioned some of the coaches that you had or didn't have at UAB. Anybody that you're kind of like, yeah, this is kind of my style. Not so much the, you mentioned, Brad Bowman coming in, which that's a name I haven't heard in quite a while. Shout out to Brad, because I just know you're listening, Brad. I just know you are in his style. But is there anybody you're kind of patterning off at this point?
No, not at that point. Because honestly, I had a coach through club 7th, 8th grade, freshman year. When I got into high school, we had kind of a track supervisor. We didn't really have a coach. In fact, you would find kids at Carruthers High School on the pole vault pit with boxing gloves, boxing during track practice from time to time. So yeah, there was no track coach. My dad was buying parachutes and bungees, and nobody knew what we were doing. It was just, you would see something and that was what you did. Right. And then even in junior college, I had a coach who was pretty good, really helped me. Obviously improved, a foot in junior college, but I'll never forget the first time I showed up and just asked the question of, first practice, I'm excited because I didn't really have a coach in high school. And I said, hey, what am I doing wrong? Like, what do you see? And the answer was, I'm just happy to have someone jumping over 22 feet. So I kind of knew where that was going. And luckily, like I said, we ended up going down that path and developing a good relationship and have been improving. But it's one of those things that I don't know that I had something to pattern anybody off at that point. Rod was a great coach. I wish I would have had Rod, throughout my entire career. But learning how the coaching profession is as well, you get those opportunities, and sometimes it's hard to pass those opportunities up. And I know even for Rod going down to, to Auburn at that time with Harvey Glantz, and he was an alum of Auburn. So it made a lot of sense for him to make that move.
So as you finish up your degree and you get this more, like you said, like a fitness cardiac rehab type of degrees, which you ended up finishing out in?
Pretty much, yes.
So what was the next step? Now you have Brad, you're definitely, it feels like you definitely have the coaching bug at this point. What's your first foray into actually coaching?
So I remember we were sitting at, I don't know if it was Alabama Invitational or Alabama Relays, but sitting in the stands, and I was competing post-collegiately because I had an extra year of indoor, basically, since the California JCs don't sponsor indoor track. And I was sitting in the stands, and Bob Lambert was the coach at Troy State back then. And he was sitting in the stands, and we developed a friendship because Bob did recruit me out of Shasta as well. I chose UAB, happened to be first cross country meet. I met Bob in person, introduced myself, and we just always, said hi at track meets whenever we'd see each other. And obviously UAB, Sanford, Troy would see each other a lot, probably 3 or 4 times a year. And I remember sitting in the stands and Coach Lambert asking me, well, you're finishing up, what are your plans? I said, well, I think I want to coach. And he's like, well, that's great. Like, we might have a graduate assistant position open down at Troy. And I said, nah, I don't want to go back to school. I said, I just want to coach. I said, I got my degree, first generation college student in my family. Like, that was kind of where I wanted to be, right? I was done. And all said and done, he's like, well, just so you know, this is kind of how it works. Like, you need to, be a graduate assistant or be a volunteer. Like, you're not going to get picked up, as and get paid, as a full-time coach coming straight out of college. So I remember just saying, all right, well, I'll think about it. And, probably about a month later or whatever, I reached out to him and said, hey, I would be interested, because I realized, you're right, everybody was telling me the same thing, just like we tell everybody today. Volunteer or graduate assistant, kind of get your foot in the door. So that was the opportunity that I was first presented with. And I would drive down on Fridays. I was finishing school. I graduated in December of '97, and so I would drive down on Fridays and just kind of, wasn't even technically a graduate assistant at that point. Just kind of volunteer and drive down on Fridays and meet the team and work with the jumpers at that time. And that's kind of how it started.
And so your first college coaching job, your first coaching job in track and field was at the greatest university in the world, Troy University. Isn't that amazing? That is not the reason why he is a guest here, folks. I know that sounds like I just softballed that one up there, but it is interesting that you made a bad decision. You chose UAB over Troy for your finish up of your undergrad, but yet the pull of the Trojans still got you in there and got you start as your started working on your grad assistant's job for track and field. Now, the real important question here, Bap, is when you were traveling down on those Fridays and stuff, who did you meet during this time that really impacted your life? Like kind of life changing, I think maybe is how I would put it personally.
Well, let's see, that was fall of 97. So we're talking 24 years later, and this relationship right here, I would have to say that, the most influential person in my life is Mike Cunningham.
I was going to let you make the joke and say, Doc Anderson, you get to meet Doc during that time, or Marcus Woody. We had a lot of great people in our program there. But, honestly, Bap, when you just said that 24 years, maybe I'm just not that good at math, but holy cow, it has been 24 years, my friend. Holy cow.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
That is hard. That makes us old.
Well, I just turned 47 a few weeks ago, and I was sitting there talking about that, and I've never felt like my age probably until after this pandemic. Start feeling a little bit older after all this. But yeah, it's been 24 years. It's been a great relationship.
Well, don't say it past tense. It's been it is
this is a great relationship.
It continues. We're going to redo this podcast when we're 97 and 95 and say, man, it's been 70 something years. So you come down to Troy University. What do you end up choosing for your grad program at that point?
I still don't know. I think it was just becoming called kinesiology at that time. It was still physical education. Mm-hmm. And that became the new term was, kinesiology was the new scientific term that was being applied to physical education.
So listen to this coaching staff. So you got Bob Lambert, rest in peace. Love you to death, Bob, who's there. And he is he's an Air Force grad who, was a high jumper, a hurdler, a javelin thrower. So he kind of comes from that realm. You got Marcus Woody, who I think was a Troy alum, if I remember correctly. I think that's correct.
Yeah, I think so.
800 meter guy, awesome guy, by the way. And then we had a legendary, well, let me pause on the legendary. You had me. Now I was I don't know, was I 20? Maybe I'm 20 years old, 21 years old. I'm an undergraduate assistant. You've heard my career before. It was terrible, right? I was a terrible, terrible, terrible hurdler. So I am as green as it can be. So I'm no help to him as far as, helping him get better as a coach, right? But then we did have kind of a legendary guy. He had been a head coach at Troy University, was very much of an athletic trainer background, went and was an athletic trainer for LSU for quite a while, and I believe helped out with the track team, and then had come back and was he was head of the athletic training program at Troy University. And then, so I would say he volunteered, coached at for our track team, Mr. Doc Anderson. And Doc was very much in charge of our area. So Bap was coming for the jumps. I'm there kind of for the sprints and hurdles. And then Doc is over all of that. And he is bigger than life. So he is running the program. So as you work your way through your time at Troy, now, what are you doing for, I'm going to call it coaching education, and it may be formal. You may tell me about some level 1s or level 2s, but overall, what are you doing to become a better coach now at this point?
Yeah. So, after my first year there, did level 1. We were somewhere up in Tennessee, but Vince Anderson was the one who put on level 1 school.
Nice.
And, obviously level 1 covers a lot, not event specific, but, it's good little background and good step, right, in the right direction. Then the next summer did level 2 down in Baton Rouge. And Boo was, of course, the person who was leading level 2. And that was one of those things that I remember. And actually, if I back up, I think if I remember right, because I was kind of caught off guard when he was doing the presentation. If I remember right, in the media guide, it was Irving Schexnayder at Louisiana. So when somebody said Boo, and I thought, oh man, this must be a relative or something at first. And then I kind of put 2 and 2 together, and then he had even mentioned he said, yeah, I actually recruited Chris when I was at Louisiana Lafayette. And I'm like, well, okay, like, thanks for the shout out. But that's why I found another school, because I wasn't really recruited, right?
You're like, hey,
but
boo,
no,
you didn't recruit me that hard. I'd have been there, boss.
But I remember, I mean, just sitting there, just, and like I said, it kind of clicked for me and things kind of came together. And I'm like, yeah, like this is a guy I really wanted to go jump for and learn from. And, now I get this opportunity, and maybe it wasn't as an athlete, but I get this opportunity now as a coach to, learn from Boo. And I mean, I've been to a lot of clinics, and like you said, I mean, his name comes up all the time from a lot of people. And there are a lot of people who influence your lives. But him having a background in teaching and how he teaches and how he makes it relatable for people, I would say by far is kind of the foundation of, how I grew as a coach from a coaching perspective and the sciences and everything.
So this is really molding you as a coach during this time. You talked about Vince Anderson, awesome, right? Boo, amazing. Is this really, and and I know Brad Bowman has a big impact on you and your style as well. So is this really kind of your Play-Doh moment where, you're kind of being molded as a coach?
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, like I said, you learn not to do things as you were coached to do, right? You may have the greatest coach in the world, but it doesn't mean that that's the right way for you to coach with your style. So having an understanding of why you do things and not just pulling out the playbook from 20 years ago. And so, Brad, Vince level 1, Boo level 2, and even sitting in level 2, Ron Grigg was sitting in level 2 during that time, who obviously we coached against, while he was at Jacksonville. And if I remember right, I think Ron was even involved with writing some curriculum, who's, I mean, a great mind. So we've just been very fortunate to be around some great people at that time. And I would say, so from the college years, that was probably, like you said, the Play-Doh, right? How I start kind of pulling from all those different guys and the educational piece and the experiential piece to start identifying who I was and how I wanted to coach. And then I'll even go back. I probably skipped over probably one of the most important people. As I talked high school and mentioned how in high school I didn't have a coach, right? We had a supervisor. So just like today, where parents try to find the right opportunity for your kids when you're growing up, Randy Huntington was actually my coach my junior year of high school. So Randy was working for Kaiser out of Fresno. I think he still is involved with Kaiser a little bit. At least he was when I was at Fresno State. But Randy coached at Fresno, and Mike Powell would come up and train with him at Fresno State from time to time. And so, Randy was a guy I got to work with that, again, I felt like as I go back and think about the people that I've been around and growing up, even from a young age, that became just so influential in who I've become as a coach.
And, shout out to Randy. I think, first of all, he is amazing, right? I mean, he's awesome. I still remember, World Juniors 3-4 years ago, his Chinese athletes went 1 and 2 in big time marks in the long jump. I mean, this guy is top 5 in the world. I almost said in jumps, but just in coaching. Let's just put it there. Okay. Randy's amazing. I think he, at least for me, shame on me, he, out of sight, out of mind, right? Now that he coaches overseas, I forget, but that's right. You and Randy, a great history there together. In fact, that's how I know Randy, is through you, and I've had lunch with Randy literally just because of you. So yeah, that's awesome.
Remember even when I was at Shasta, they used to have the Modesto relays, and Mike Powell jumped in Modesto relays one summer. And I came down from Shasta, was sitting in the stands and saw Randy sitting there. And of course, he welcomed me to come sit with him, and was asking how things were going in junior college at the time. And I mean, I was just in his hip pocket, right? And Mike's jumping, and he'd walk down to the stands and kneel down at the bottom of the stands talking to Mike in between jumps. And I remember walking down with him a couple of times, and I was just in awe. So again, it's just those moments that get created, right? And those experiences that really kind of helped fuel that passion. And that was just one of the moments I'll never forget, sitting in Modesto relays and listening to Randy talk to Mike, and knowing that that's who he coached, and some influence for me, but that, hey, that was even if it was only for a few months, 3 months, that was one of my coaches at one time.
So it's one thing to have the X's and O's down, and you're starting to, at this point in your career, you're kind of amalgamating a lot of things, right? Your formal education is playing a part into this. Coaches that you have coached you, from a Randy and a Rod and Brad, and then some coaches you're learning from, the Vinces and Boos and me. Let's just be honest, you're learning a lot from me, and that's great. But to take the next level in coaching, you also have to have the work ethic with it, and that includes recruiting. What was happening maybe during this time that really, because I've known you forever, so I know the answer to this, but your work ethic is on par as your education, and your education is really high. So I mean, you're a relentless worker when it comes to coaching track and field. What was being the same kind of molding for your education? What was being molded on the work ethic side at this time?
Well, like you said, I mean, from a recruitment standpoint, right? Just understanding recruiting's the name of the game. It may not necessarily be that it's the number one kid or the top kid in that event area, but identifying talent. And I remember, when we were coaching together, I mean, you just found a way to recruit, and we'd get the school station wagon or van or whatever at Troy. And I mean, sleeping in Burger King parking lots and no hotels because there was no budget, just finding a way to get out and see student athletes and try to identify people we wanted to bring in the program. And I think, I wouldn't say young and naive, but maybe a little young and naive to go after like the number 2 kid in the country to come to Troy. Right. I remember we recruited Nicole Denby, tried to, had conversations with her. We recruited Jasper Demps, who we ended up actually getting at Troy, who is maybe the number 8 or 10 hurdler in the country. We had a pretty good class. I think if I remember too, didn't you do a visit with Justin Gatlin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, old Jay. That's true. Yeah, I can literally say old Jay now. He's almost 40 years old, man. I'm like, Jay and I were talking the other day, and I was just like, so what's retirement look like? And he's like, yeah, I don't know. We'll worry about that. And I was like, good for you, man. Yeah. You still do it, brother? Do it, man. Come on.
Yeah.
But it's funny talking to him now as a 39-year-old father and businessman, and it's like, dude, you were a 17-year-old kid sitting on the couch when I was talking to your parents and you. It's just, we're old. We're old, brother. We're old.
Well, and like I said, I go back to like some of the, we had a couple really good recruiting classes. And I just remember us sitting there 23, 20, 21, whatever, I mean, we're kids and going out and recruiting like we were pros, but just having that understanding, of, what it takes and the phone calls you had to make, and definitely just burning the midnight oil to find a way to start your career and be successful, and get the right kids to come to your program.
I think there's a lesson there in that naivete, right? Like on one hand, you don't want to be naive and therefore it makes you rude or those kind of things, but being a little bit naive of like, wait a minute, I'm at such and such school, or I'm at such and such division, so I'm only supposed to recruit up to this mark in whatever event you're recruiting. Well, sometimes put yourself out there. And you're right. We also had Alicia Denson, who was either she jumped 6 feet out of high school or was stinking close, and that's not supposed to sign with Troy University, at least back then. Who was our sprinter from St. Aloysius? 200 meter.
Latoya Watkins.
Latoya
Lewis. I had her Arrington Watkins. Was a hurdler from St. Lucius. And then we even tried recruiting Vince Wilfork was from San Luis, wasn't he? Wasn't he shot putter?
Didn't I tell this? I can't remember if I told this story on the podcast recently. So Bap and I were, first of all, he's old, so he forgets these stories. So we would literally drive 8 hours, 10 hours into Florida, and no budget. So there was no like staying the night at a hotel. It was like, okay, we'll crash here. He says Burger King because I knew exactly the story. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. We're like, do we got to get some sleep or we're not going to do it? Here's the sad part. Here's why we had to sleep in the Burger King parking lot. Because you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, there's 2 of you. Why can't one drive and the other, sleep or whatever? So we'd take Bab's car a lot, and he had an automatic. And your gracious podcast host here could not drive, still cannot drive an automatic.
Stick.
No, stick. Yeah, sorry. See,
Yeah.
that's all I can think of as an automatic for a car. I don't even know the alternative, right? So a manual, that's right, a stick. But one time Bap was he was desperate. So it's 2:30 in the morning. I don't even know where we are. We're in nowhere, Florida.
I think I was there, Dothan or somewhere. Who knows?
Yeah, we weren't that close to home. No, we were still far from home. And he's like, look, man, he gave me like a tutorial. And he goes, I'll be asleep right here. And there's no one on the road. That was kind of the safe part. It's like, if you stalled out, well, it's 3:00 in the morning. No one's on the road. I think we got about 400 meters before I was like, look, dude, this ain't working. And so we pulled into the Burger King, and that's where we slept in the car until it was time to go. But
I think I remember, just don't stop, right? Yeah, once we get to fifth gear, just keep driving, just don't stop.
I'd be slowing down when I saw the light, like, okay, can I time this to get back to green so I can just keep on going? Just don't stop. Yeah. But one of the things that molded us a little bit back then, Bap, and I had the conversation, we had Ron Grigg on the podcast earlier this year, was, we drive these 8 hours. Oh, I was telling the Vincent Wilfork story. So we drive 8, 9, 10 hours. We're watching a meet. We're not there to recruit Vincent Wilfork, folks. Don't get it twisted, but we're way up in the stands watching the entire track meet. And on the complete other side of the stands is the shot put. And let me just tell you, Bap and I, we weren't recruiting shot putters, so we weren't even paying attention. But out of the corner of our eye, you know how you can just see, like when Ryan Krauser throws the shot put, it's a little different than when regular Joe, and that not Joe Kovacs, because he does this too, but your regular Jimmy, I don't want Joe giving me a call, man, I'll get in trouble. Little Jimmy throws it. It's different when Ryan throws it. So out of the corner of our eyes, we see the shot put, I mean, just like launch. And both of us were like, wait a minute, that was, we're far, we're 100 yards from the shot put, because it was clear on the other side. And you were like, dude, that went farther. That went like, wait, like I got to go find out who that is. Like maybe we do need to go recruit a shot putter. I'm gonna go find out. So Bap trucks it down there, because I'm like, hey, that's too far, boss. I'll sit here and watch the hundreds and 200s. Bap comes back and goes, yeah, it's this guy named Vincent Wilfork. I guess he's like a really good football player. I think he already signed with the University of Miami. and now fast forward, it's like, that was Vincent freaking Wilfork, man.
I won't. Really I'll never forget that one. He was, I don't know the distance, but I mean, it was like, seemed like 25 feet farther than everybody else.
Yeah, way farther than anybody else. Exactly. So see, at least we could see, that's how good you and I were on talent identification. We're like, oh, that kid throws 25 foot farther than everybody else. We should probably recruit him. That's how good we were. You got to have an eye. You got to learn that eye. You just can't have that naturally, folks. But where I'm getting at here, Bap, is every time we would do that, and this was a regular, if we weren't at a meet, we were recruiting, right? That's kind of our mantra and the way we did it. Every meet we'd go to, the two same guys would be there hustling just as much as us. Ron Grigg, who was at Jacksonville University, and we've had him on the podcast. You got to go listen to his episode, and it'll fill in the gaps a little bit for this episode here. And Todd Lane, who I can't remember, I always forget it. Georgia Southern at the time,
Southern,
yeah. Was at Georgia Southern, now at LSU. And we've had Todd's sister, Carrie, on the podcast, and that was an amazing episode as well. But every time we'd go and we'd see these two jokers every time, Ron and Todd, like, who are you recruiting? And inevitably, we're all recruiting kind of the same people. You're just battling day in and day out on these guys. So we had to really, like, I don't know how to say we worked harder, but we had to hustle with all of these recruits.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like I said, trying to stay in the game, and just finding a way, just kind of relentless from that standpoint. And I remember even there would be times we'd go into Coach Lambert's office in the morning for maybe a 9 or 10 o'clock meeting, and he'd come stumbling in, and he'd kind of look at us like, did you not sleep? Were you at the bar? What was the deal? Like, you look like you're struggling a little bit this morning. It's like, making international calls, because you'd be making calls from 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, because that was the time to call an international student, right? And again, just trying to figure out how we could compete even in that conference. You're around good people who are in, it doesn't have to be the big schools, and the Power Fives. You can be in a mid-major conference around some just great coaches, great minds, people that hustle, and people that elevate your conference and elevate your own game just because you're competing with them. So
yeah, I love that. Who we fought with on a daily basis and became really good friends with, ended up being a Todd Lane and a Ron Grigg. Like, like we were on the right track here as far as who we were going to war with, if you say that way. So let's speed forward here. So Troy University, you started out as a grad assistant. You ended up becoming the full-time assistant coach.
My last year.
Yep.
And last year was full-time for a year. I think I started about $16,000 or $18,000.
Is that right?
Made me question what I was doing at that time. Hey, is this coaching gig really what I want to do? I think it was $16,000.
Oh man.
It was about double the GA stipend.
Just shaking my head. The sad part in our industry is I don't know that we've advanced. This was 20 plus years ago. I'm not sure we've advanced very far from that as an entry level assistant coach, even on the air quotes here, Division I level, right? Everybody thinks Division I, big, bad, you gonna get paid. And I'm afraid we have not advanced in our coaching salaries as much as we should have and need to. So you can't live on $16,000 a year. You and I are eating a lot of ramen. We're eating a lot of $5 plates at Jackie B's.
Jackie B's.
Where do you go next from Troy University?
So I actually went to South Alabama for a short stint. Brad Bowman was down at South Alabama. After 3 years at Troy, kind of felt like, hey, this was an opportunity. He was looking for somebody. It was my old coach, somebody who, again, was a mentor, not only as a student athlete, but kind of helped me think about, going down that path and becoming a coach. And I thought, man, this would be a great opportunity to go really learn from him, be in his hip pocket. And it was a learning experience. We'd have what we call Country Boy Clinic on Tuesday nights, something that Brad would start. And it was really to help us become better coaches. And what we would do was we would sit down and we'd have the staff would come in and he would give us a topic to kind of research. And it might be ground contact times. It could have been, you just think of a specific task in an event area or whatever. And he wanted us to bring to the table, literally like the research and the science based and how it was studied and everything else. Right. But at the same time, after you got done presenting that, you had to then turn around and present it in layman's terms, like you were coaching a country boy who didn't understand any science background. So that's why we called it Country Boy Clinic. So that was one of those things that, again, during that time, just being out at the track, seeing how he coaches, being in the weight room, kind of taking that next step for me, sitting in the office. And, the office was a learning experience. And so that was an opportunity for me to kind of be under my old coach. It was a short-lived experience because Shasta College called and, they were looking for somebody as their head coach out at Shasta, which again was where I went to junior college for, a year and a half, almost 2 years. And Gary Lewis, who was the athletic director at the time, was my former head coach there at Shasta College. Just presented the opportunity, and I thought, hey, this is an opportunity to be a head coach, right? And at a young age to try to lead a program. And so took that opportunity and moved out to Shasta to Redding, California.
So 2 questions about South Alabama. One is, Brad Bowman obviously is a big part of your life and the coaching specifically up to this point. When we were at Troy, he used to bring kids and just beat us senseless. Like there was something about like, as Brad's kids would come and do really well on the same level, right? Like we're Troy and South Alabama at that point. We weren't same conference, I don't believe at that time. No. But there was just something like, oh, he's doing something different. So we, even for me, not being a former athlete, like my ears would perk up. I'm like, all right, what's this guy doing? Cause something's going different here. And then going to be an assistant under him. What was that like? Was there an intimidation factor? Was there were you able to break out of the coach athlete relationship that you guys had and now become coaches, but he's still your boss? Like, what was that like to have, a strong coach like him as your head coach?
I think it was still a little bit of like that coach athlete relationship, honestly. But he still took me in and mentored me. Right. And when I say it was still kind of more that coach athlete relationship, meaning, I didn't really have a group, coming from Troy where we had a little more autonomy, the reins were reeled back in a little bit, if you would. So like I said, it just became a learning stop from that standpoint. It was more of kind of helping him with what he needed at that point, and more observation for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And, you know, one of the biggest things, I mean, he's probably the one that helped me the most as far as the path that we'd go down. And again, you know, recruiting top 10 kids in the country, trying to get them to come to Troy, versus I don't know that he necessarily recruited top 10 kids in the country, you know. And I remember him saying, hey, like, Chris, you can make a living off the right kid. If the right girl that runs 12 flat, 25 flat, and, you know, 56.5, if you identify him and if you have all the data and the pieces of the puzzle, that kid could be a superstar for you. You know, the 12.2 sprinter who's a 15 flat hurdler. I mean, and he would get kids like that were running 13.2 2 years later, you know, and just identifying the right kids. So that was you know, the learning from him, knowing how he recruited and seeing the personal connections that he made with people. I mean, he got kids to understand they believed in them because of the things he would tell them.
So you go from there to Shasta as the head coach. I always like this. My favorite question of a coach when they get their first head coaching job. Were you ready? Were you prepared?
You know, I want to say I was prepared. We did win 2 conference championships. However, I think for me, it was the glamour of being the head coach without really doing my research of what all did that entail, meaning, you know, there were no classes for me to teach. I was a glorified stipend. I lived in my office and in my Jeep for half a year. You know, I kind of joke about my aunt and uncle joke about it all the time. They would drive through on a fishing trip because he would fish the Trinity River. And when he would come up, he'd do that a couple times a year. And when he'd come up, he'd bring me mac and cheese, top ramen, and tuna and crackers because I had nowhere to eat. And literally, I mean, I'm not ashamed to tell the story because I always tell people, like, when I took that job, my intention was to be a head coach and be available for my student athletes. And even though I wasn't paid to do that, and I really needed to have a part-time job, that part-time job took me away from the office and didn't give me the opportunity to be there when it came to academic issues, you know, just personal issues that kids were dealing with at that time. So literally I slept in my office. I slept, you know, in our track shed. In fact, I'll never forget, because 9/11, the guy who was a janitor came and beating on the track shed, woke me up and told me what had happened. And I was literally sleeping in the track shed when 9/11 happened. So that was just, it was kind of one of those things that, like, hey, this is a great opportunity, obviously on paper. I sometimes forget about it, you know, after 24 years of coaching and having, from a head coaching perspective, right? Sometimes you forget, like, well, it was only a couple of years and it's junior college, like 18 years ago. You know, you kind of forget that you were a head coach just because I've been in this assistant role for such a long time. But, you know, I was fortunate, had a really good staff there. Bobby Luffman, one of my great friends who, you know, he would come out and work during the season, same thing, go back to Alabama in the off season because we couldn't live. He's like, I'm not sleeping in your Jeep with you. So, you know, we made it work. And again, women won two conference titles there, and but not have an opportunity to be a full-time at the junior college. And that's where it's at, right? I mean, you get a lot of these coaches that'll retire from sports so they can stay home and teach a little bit more and not have to travel as much, but they didn't give up those teaching jobs. So, I mean, I think I made $10,000 during the season, and, you know, worked at a car wash in the off season, and, you know, very minimally so I could be in the office. And at that point said, all right, I got to move on, right? I'm not going to get married and living in my office, and just kind of having a life and moving forward. So I started applying to Division I jobs all around the country again. Well,
don't move forward too fast here, because I got a couple of questions here. You know,
Yep.
Now that, you know, you mentioned 24 years of coaching, and so now you have something that, you know, can't be rushed. You have experience, right? You know, say hindsight's 2020. You have, you know, you're able to kind of see and view things differently, understand them differently. So, you know, kind of thinking about now, we're in 2021, and this is back, what are we at? Well, you said 9/11, so this is 2000 and 2001, 2001, 2002 time, right? What is it, what, in your opinion, Bap, what is it about track coaches? And maybe this does happen in other industries and I just don't see it because I'm not in it and I didn't live it, right? But I don't ever hear of an accountant taking a job at XYZ accountant firm and sleeping in their Jeep so that they, and making 10,000 a year so that they can be an accountant. I don't hear teachers. Maybe I do hear some of teachers actually, but you know, mostly it's teachers. They go and they work, they teach at such and such elementary school or high school. It just seems like there's something with track coaches. This story that you're telling, sadly, is not unique. I can just, you know, you tell that story and I can think of it quickly, 10 people right off the top of my head that took part-time jobs, took, you know, living with 5 other adults to split rent so that they can afford to coach. Not they took a job so they can afford to live. They did things so that they could afford to coach. What is it, do you think, about coaching track specifically that leads us to these type of situations and stories that we hear so frequently?
You know, you're right. I mean, when I think about it, I don't hear those stories from, you know, football coaches, obviously baseball coaches, things like that. I'm sure there's some out there. But I know, like, from my perspective, I felt like if I was a head coach, that would help my resume. Right. So taking that step back, even though the pay wasn't great, that just on paper, that would help me and look good. 24 years later, do I think that was a benefit? I think I learned a lot of things from it, obviously. I think the people that I coached understand the commitment that I had to them by making some of those sacrifices to try to be there. And it paid off from the coaching perspective and the results we had. But I was young and I was single, and, you know, I was in a position to be able to afford to do that. I mean, if I was, you know, married at, you know, 26, 27 years old at that time, I wouldn't be able to do that. I probably had to make some really hard life decisions on whether I was going to be in the coaching profession anymore. So I think it's really just about, you know, that move for me, and probably for a lot of people, and making those sacrifices, is how do I show that I can get to the next level, right? Just taking that opportunity.
So I'm going to say it back how I hear it. Correct me where I'm mishearing it. What I hear you say, that I think of someone who's thinking long term, like, okay, I'm going to eat ramen and sleep in my Jeep for a year, 2 years, so that I can get that head coaching, not only that title, but the experience that comes with it, because I believe in 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, that's going to pay off in my career. Is that?
No doubt. That's exactly in my mind.
That's interesting. And I think you ticked off any baseball and football coaches that listen and say, oh, no, man, this happens. I GA'd at, you know, such and such college and slept in my car. I'm sure it does happen in other sports. You're right. And I'm sure there's a football podcast recording right now that said, you know, I never hear about this in track, but in football we do, blah, 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 you know, so. But I do know, you know, I live in this track world and I hear this quite too often.
Yeah.
But I do think, you know, generally I would describe track coaches as long-term thinkers, right? They're long-term developers. They think about when they get a kid, what's that kid going to run in 4 years, not necessarily in 4 days and 4 weeks. They're thinking, how can I help them achieve success in their career here, their own careers. They're thinking a lot of long-term. So that makes a lot of sense. It certainly is not the, to become famous for living in a Jeep. That's not what we're doing here. The other question I had, you know, to bring immense value to our listeners, California junior college system is different than not only NJCAA, you know, so like I coached in the Kansas Jayhawk conference, so that junior college and other colleges. Can you explain some of the differences of California junior college, just so people maybe kind of get a grasp of how California JUCOs operate a little bit differently?
Yeah, well, first, I mean, there's no scholarship, right? I mean, it's, you know, a lot of the national junior colleges can offer, you know, some tuition and, you know, different stipends. There's no scholarship. So recruiting is actually, you know, based on your county, where you are, and like the contiguous counties. Like, you have a district where you can recruit from. So even somebody from like Sacramento or Southern California, if they were interested in coming all the way up to Northern California, up to Redding, they'd have to fill out a first contact form. We couldn't initiate that contact. So I had if you look at kind of like the population in Northern California around the Redding area, Shasta County, I mean, Shasta County was pretty much where you recruited. So, I'm guessing maybe, 10, 11 high schools kind of in that county, maybe 13. So it was a pretty narrow window. Every once in a while you get some kids from Oregon, Washington that came down to play football that ended up, coming out for track as well, because that was the football opportunity coming across the border for them. So,
okay. Yeah. That's what I was going to ask. Why do people from out of state come to California junior colleges? So maybe for some other opportunities, football or whatnot. And then why do people leave California? Because I believe it's a pretty good financial situation though, if you go to your local California JUCO, right?
Yeah, back then, I mean, it was literally like $15 a unit, and then you still kind of paid like regular out of state, fees for an out of state student. It was not that cheap. So, today I haven't paid attention. I know we send some kids over to the local junior college, but I mean, I'm just kind of throwing a number out there and guessing, but maybe $25-$30 a unit. So, I mean, it's cheap if you're a California student to stay at the local community college and develop. And you had kids who were there because they needed to be there academically, didn't meet the standards to go on at a Division I school, at a high school, Division II. And then you had some kids who, literally just were underdeveloped, right? And they went to the local community college and wanted to continue competing in track and field and came out. So it was a healthy mix of, talent and heart and desire, and had a really good time and really enjoyed, my stop there.
And the competition setting, so you don't compete so the NJCA is the National Junior College Athletic Association. California competes basically much like the high school side in a state meet in a northern and southern, and then it combines, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you have NorCal, SoCal, and then so many people from each of those. Like you have your NorCal championship, so many qualify for the state finals, and then you come together for a state championship at the end of the year. For us competing, it's just like any level, right? I mean, a Division III school can go to Alabama relays. Division I school can go to some small school up in Indiana and go to a competition. We would go to Southern Oregon. We'd go down, Fresno relays. I mean, at the time, and we had different places that we would go and try to get exposure. So it wasn't just a junior college type schedule. It was definitely heavily emphasized as a junior college schedule, but at the same time, part of that was being able to help promote those kids who are trying to go on to the next level and get them in front of four-year schools. And so we'd get to other invitationals as well to be able to showcase them.
So I know you're living the dream, living in the track shack, and eating mac and cheese, which, that's not a terrible food. But you do yearn for, maybe a salary that can pay your car note or something, and maybe get an apartment. I don't know. Where do we go next after Shasta?
So I applied University of Tulsa. Actually applied for a position there. And what was funny was, I talked to Steve Gully, had an interview, applied for the job, went to the post office box and opened up my mail and had a no thank you letter. We had made another hire, right? And as I was getting in my car, get a phone call, and he says, I wanted to talk to you about this position we have. I'm like, well, I just got a letter saying that, no thank you, like you already hired somebody.
You were like, either this guy is calling to rub it in. He's either calling to rub it in, or he's so empathetic he wanted to call me and tell me sorry that I did not hire you. And I could see that from Gully, because he's one of the nicest, most genuine people in this world. So
yeah, so it just happened to be that he had filled the position I applied for, but then another position opened up immediately after that as a sprint coach, sprints hurdles. Wow. So that door opened up, and it's like, hey, I've already interviewed you. We've already had this conversation. It's, I obviously understand you could step in and fill this role. So would you be interested in that position? So kind of went down that path with him, and, came in and did my interview, met with student athletes, and I decided that I would jump on board and head to Tulsa, Oklahoma.
So you become the sprints and hurdles coach because he hired someone else to be the jumps coach.
Yes.
Was there tension when you got over there and you're like, all right, jumps coach, that was supposed to be my position. It worked out, but still.
No, what's funny is I mean, through my career, yes, I was a jumper and that's how I started, but jumps, sprints, hurdles, a little bit of vault, not my forte, but coached some vaulters, done a little bit of everything, right? Always been at like a mid-major type school to where it's been more than, I've never been able to specialize in one event area. I've never been a hurdle coach, never been a jumps coach, it's always kind of been a little bit of everything. So really, when it's all said and done, there for a couple of years, I didn't have to worry about the jumpers, right? I mean, it was just sprints, hurdles. I was able to really kind of focus on that a little bit more. So yeah, no tension. Karen Fink was the young lady that came in as the jumps coach. So Karen and I had a great relationship.
Now, as a former jumper yourself, and have coached jumps, and even though Brad Bowman was an excellent explosive coach, sprints, jumps, and hurdles, I think of him as a jumps coach. Now you're at Tulsa and you're coaching sprints and hurdles, and Karen, and I love you, Karen. I haven't heard Karen's name in forever. That's so awesome that she comes back in memories here. Did you always kind of keep an eye over at jumps and just be kind of yearning to be in that sand pit? Or were you able to kind of just, like you said, this is your first time being able to focus on one event area, or were you able to just pour yourself into that one event area?
No, at that time, I mean, I was definitely able to just kind of stay in my lane and focus on that area. Like I said, it was a little less off my plate, really, kind of for the first time, in everywhere that I'd been. So it was a blessing for me just to be able to focus on sprints and hurdles.
And so how did your time at Tulsa, how long were you there, and how did your time at Tulsa go?
So I was there for 3 years. Was pretty fortunate. Had some talent when I got there. Shauna Robinson, Stanley Redwine was the coach before Steve came in. So I think it was Steve's second year, maybe second year that I came in. And so there was a little bit of standing, Redwine, local Tulsa talent that he had brought in, and Steve had brought in a couple really good kids on the heels of that as well. So it's pretty fortunate. There was a good group of kids to work with. And Shauna was one of those that was, an 1160 sprinter when I got there, and ended up running 1128, 2284 in the 200. And I know she had an affinity for you. We'd always talk about that, right?
She was awesome.
Every time I introduce Mike Cunningham to my student athletes, everyone loves Mike.
It's because I'm not coaching them. I'm very lovable to an athlete when it's like, oh, good, that guy hasn't got to coach me. He's awesome.
But yeah, so like I said, I was lucky to be in the right spot. We'd run, I think, 335 and, indoors right when I got there the first year, off the heels of that, and 4x4. And so just happened to be in the right spot. And we kind of started going more in the direction of distance. As you've seen, like Tulsa's had a lot of success in distance over the last few years, national, getting to the national championships. I think, I want to say they won the region last year, or the year before. And I remember having that conversation with Steve at the time and saying, okay, I understand it. Yeah, I'm a sprint hurdle coach, but if this is kind of the direction the program's going, then would love to be involved in helping be a part of that, right? So I was at the Kansas State meet. I would, sometimes go to Missouri, wherever it might be, out at cross country meets, recruiting and trying to identify distance kids. So that was a good opportunity for me, again, in my continued growth as a coach, was the opportunity to go out and be involved in the recruiting process with him from a distance perspective. So,
I know the full story of this, and what I mean by that is you have a real affinity, maybe still to this day, and we'll learn why it's been strengthened, but you have a special affinity for Tulsa in your heart, being a West Coast California guy who, I'm gonna say, grew up in Alabama. Tulsa's a special place in your heart. You said you were there for 3 years. What would take you away from something that, I know holds a special place in your heart?
Well, after 3 years coaching at Tulsa, it was, I remember we were hosting I guess it would be the WAC championships at the time. Fresno State was in our conference, and Coach Fraley was the coach at Fresno State at the time. And we had an army of volunteers and officials in hosting what was our first ever, WAC championship, conference championship at Tulsa, and we wanted to put on a good show. So I just remember Coach Fraley coming up to me and like, man, Baptista, I've never seen so many volunteers at a track meet in my life. You got to have like 200 people here. And Fraley was a guy that, probably should mention him too. I mean, as a kid, running club track, we got to Fresno State, when I was a, 6th, 7th, 8th grade. And so I've known Bob since I was, 11, 12 years old for the most part. But the opportunity, again, Chris Campbell was a guy I hung out with when I'd go back on vacations. He was the throws coach at Fresno State at the time. And I remember telling, Bob, love where I'm at. It's Tulsa. I mean, like, I do have this affinity for Tulsa, and I'm sure we're going to go down that path here in a minute. Why I still go back there 2, 3, 4 times a year. But it was an opportunity to go home. Bob had an opportunity that opened up at Fresno State. And without getting too far down the road, it was Fresno State and Cal Poly. Terry Crawford was the coach at Cal Poly at the time. And after my second year, she had called Steve and asked if she could talk to me. And I remember Steve and I having a conversation saying, hey, like, what do we got to do to have stop these phone calls, right? Like, I would love for you to stay here. And I said, well, how about a raise? Parlayed that into a little bit of a raise there at Tulsa. But, when it came down to it, after my 3rd year there was just an opportunity. I mean, between, kind of Cal Poly and Fresno State, an opportunity to come home. And obviously ended up at Fresno. Like I said, I grew up 18 miles outside of town. Had free rent there for a little bit. So again, making that sacrifice. And the salaries weren't a lot different between the 2 offers. So headed after 3 years at Tulsa, headed home to Fresno.
My experience with people who are born and raised in California is they all want to get back to California. I've only visited California, never lived there, but it has a draw for you Californians, man. So I can see where going back home, that was the big draw, right? You grew up a Fresno State fan. You went to games. That was kind of, maybe you even had dreams of playing football at Fresno State through your high school playing days. This was home. This would be like if Troy University, for some reason, decided to offer me a job, right? You'd be like, oh, this is home. This is where I grew up, right? So to tease here a little bit, tell us a very important person that you met about, I'm going to say 5 days before you left Tulsa to go to Fresno. Who did you meet?
You know that better than I do almost. So me and a couple of our staff members were out having a little last hurrah, out on the town in Tulsa. And happened to be sitting at a bar outside, and these young ladies come in the door, and somebody kind of caught my eye right away, and they come walking around looking for a table. And of course they buzzed right by us the first time. And then before you know it, they kind of come back in, and obviously they went in looking for a seat, didn't find one, came back out again. And so we start motioning over, hey, like, we have some seats available at our table. And it just happened to be one of the guys was one of our sports information and marketing guys. And he happened to have worked with this person. Her name is Valerie, with the Tulsa Drillers. And so, just a nice, friendly conversation for that evening. But definitely one of those things that in my mind was sitting there thinking, like, okay, like, I've got eyes on this girl, right? Like, I'm interested. And lo and behold, I know I'm leaving town. So, what am I going to do? Right. So it was just part of the conversation for the evening. And two other people on our Tulsa staff was with us earlier, and then they ended up going home for the night. So they weren't there for that part of the evening. I remember going in the office the next day and telling one of our female assistant coaches, I'm like, wouldn't you know, like, I would meet somebody and I'm getting ready to leave. And she's like, well, did you get her number? I'm like, no. And I said, like, I'm leaving town, and she said, well, like, do you know where she works? And I'm like, well, yeah. She's like, well, you should call her and ask her if she wants to go to lunch. And I'm like, yeah. So I thought about it and I didn't. And then the next day she'd asked me, and she's like, did you reach out to her? And I said, no, I didn't. And then finally, I reached out. I sent an email and just said, hey, like, I met you out a couple nights ago. would love to take you out to lunch, get to know you. And, I just kind of took a shot in the dark there, and all said and done, I'm packing up the U-Haul, the Ryder truck, and I've got everything coming out of my studio apartment. And the only thing I have left is like a place to lay my head and the computer waiting for this email response. And nothing happens. And then finally, you know what? I'm like, I'm not going to hear back from this person. So like I packed everything up, told my landlord, hey, I'm going to head out a day early, and drove back home to Fresno. And I got to Fresno, I think had about a day to recover from the trip, and got on my email, and I had this response. I said, I'd love to go to lunch. And I'm like, yeah, now I'm in California. Great. So we talked, and, I got her number, we talked, and lo and behold, I kind of surprised her she had some plans for a weekend, but I kind of surprised her, and I flew back, and we went out on our first date. And that turned into probably about 6 weeks later, she flew out to California. And then about a couple months after that, it turned into every other week we were pretty much flying back and forth. She ends up moving out to California after a year and a half. Another year and a half later, we ended up getting engaged, and now, this is going to, here on October 24th, be 12 years. So that we've been married.
The greatest love story ever told. Now, if you're happen to watching us on YouTube right now, you saw me shaking my head, and those were the exact type of head shakes as Bap is talking to me through. Remember, we communicate almost on a daily basis, especially at that point in our lives, right? So he's calling me. He's like, hey, I met a girl, and I was like, man, you ain't even moved to California yet. And I thought he was talking about a girl in California, and he's like, no, in Tulsa. And I was like, you still moving, right? Like, what do you mean you met someone? Like, it doesn't matter. You're literally moving. You're not moving to Oklahoma City. You're moving to California. Like, this is a non-starter. And he's like, no, I like her. I like her a lot. And then they go to lunch. And I was like, how's this going to work, man? And remember, this is before cell phones, really. I mean, like he said, he's waiting for an email on the computer, not a phone. Like, this is before all that. And then they start flying. And I'm like, Bap, this doesn't exist. Like, this world is not, you live in some kind of rom-com here, man, is what you're trying to live. And like you said, now they're, 12 years, 2 beautiful kids. And she continues to play in the story coming up here soon, but definitely, like, I'm so thankful. Who was the person that encouraged you to reach out to Val? I kept saying, like, no, reach out. Who was that?
That was Summer Hutchison.
Man, shout out Summer. Summer knew that you two were supposed to be together. Summer's the smartest person in this entire story here, man. So thank you, Summer, because my guy is happy and healthy because of your persistence. Thank you for that. Thank you. So you get to go back home. You're doing this long distance relationship thing. Not only, this is just so crazy, man, not long distance relationship for someone you've been dating for a year or 2 years. You're doing this long distance relationship with someone you don't even know at this point. You've been apart. It's just crazy. But you're going to Fresno State. You're with a great Bob Fraley. You're back home. Great conference, great team, very diverse team, not focused on any one thing except for pole vaulters because it's Bob Fraley. So you're always going to have, 30, 40, 50 vaulters, of course. How's that going? What was it? You obviously had some expectations going back home and going under Fraley and Fresno State. How did those expectations play out?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where, Bob kind of handled the men at the time. I handled the women. It slowly kind of parlayed itself into different roles, right? So I was the women's sprints, hurdles, jumps coach, and then picked up the men's hurdles. And then, he kind of held on to the men's sprints, and then I picked up the men's jumps. And I think it was just one of those things where, it was kind of a test, right? Like, here's the group I'm going to give you right now. Just kind of see what you do. And then as I get to, feel more confident with you, kind of hand you a little bit more. So that role kind of turned into, again, sprints, hurdles, jumps, covering all those event areas by the time it was all said and done. Bob was there for 3 years. And then he retired. And then that position, basically, and when he retired, we were all let go. Our contracts were not renewed, which gave the new head coach coming in and whoever they're going to hire the opportunity to, interview people and hire his staff. And so, there was a few months there. I think you and I were even talking quite a bit, right? Opportunities. You guys have, a company that you guys work with out here on the West Coast, Commercial Systems. And he said, hey, here might be an opportunity for you, Bap. I mean, I just remember it's like, hey, I don't know where this is going to go. They don't even know who they're hiring yet. And it took a while to kind of get that done. So, lo and behold, Scott Windsor from Notre Dame got hired as a head coach, and, he started hiring his staff, and I applied for the job and kind of went through the interview process with him, and, was the last one hired and got hired back on to Fresno State after probably 3.5, 4 months, of a hiatus and not knowing what life was going to bring.
So what you're describing there, where as an assistant coach and your head coach either gets let go, or more common is goes to maybe another institution, you have that kind of uneasiness, right? What's the new head coach going to do? Am I going to be retained? While this was going on, what are you thinking for your career? Is there any, I don't want to say doubts, but like, is there any thought of like, man, should I just stop this? I mean, I've lived in my car, for crying out loud. I'm 3 years in Tulsa. I'm dating this gal, but now I'm 1,000 miles away. Was there any thoughts of getting out of coaching at this point? Or was it like, no, if the new coach doesn't hire me at Fresno, I'll apply somewhere. Like we're going to continue down this coaching journey?
I think at that time, I was comfortable being back home. Right. So it was, we'll see if I get back in at Fresno State versus, again, what are some other opportunities? How do you kind of keep your foot in the door in the track world? And the commercial systems thing was kind of funny because like we've always joked about working at Gill, right? I mean, I go back to Fred Dixon and Shasta College days, and Gill has always kind of been something that's come up every once in a while throughout my career. And I remember telling you, even at one point when there was an opportunity, I'm like, hey, if I can be the Fred Dixon and stay on the West Coast, I'd love to work for Gill. He's like, nope, only Fred does that.
Only Fred. There is no more than one Fred Dixon.
Yeah. So, when you kind of brought up, I think you and Fred had talked to me both about, this commercial systems being like a vendor for you guys, somebody that you guys work with in-ground equipment and stuff. Well, hey, maybe that could be something, right, that would work. So I think it wasn't so much, hey, I'm going to start applying everywhere, because not only that was that was after 3 years. So at that point, Valerie was in California. And we're going down that path, right? So this isn't like, oh, you just moved here, let's pack up and move. It was, figure out how to keep the relationship going and moving forward, right? Like, here's somebody that moved cross country and we're getting ready to get married. So we weren't talking about trying to move on and go move to another part of the country. So luckily that happened to work out with Scott. That was a good opportunity, and luckily I got rehired, I guess you would say, not retained, but rehired.
So Scott made the right decision. How long? So you were with Bob for 3 years, is that right? At Fresno State?
With Bob, yeah.
And then how long with Scott?
8 years with Scott Windsor.
And so during this time of the 8 years with Scott, life changes radically for you. You already mentioned you and Val were going down the path of getting married. You do. You had the best man a guy could ever have at your wedding. My personal opinion. Yeah. And then what else happens during this 8 years personally?
We end up having 2 children,
That changes your life.
Definitely. There's no doubt about that.
And you're doing a great job at Fresno State. Things are going pretty well. Your work ethic is still high. Your coaching ability is still high, but you married your match. And what I mean by that is Val's work ethic is very high, and Val's skill set at her job is very high. And she's continually growing up in her business that she's working in as well. And then what happens?
Yeah. So let's see, fast forward to about 2016, right? Valerie, well, I'll back up. Let's go to 2013, in a recruiting class that, slowly we had been building and kind of putting pieces of the puzzle together at Fresno. And I remember sitting down with our team end of 2013 and just saying, hey, like 2016 is going to be a special year. This is what we're looking for. Like we kind of back up to what we were saying earlier in the podcast, right? Like this is, you think long term, not overnight. But we thought we had the pieces of the puzzle to be very impactful at the national level within our conference, in something that we hadn't done at Fresno State in a while, especially on the women's side. And lo and behold, yes, we had a great success. We had a lot of success in 15 and 16, but lo and behold, what was placed on my heart in 2013. I realized when 2016 came about, it wasn't just about the coaching world, right? And what happened was, at the end of that year, my wife had actually been presented with an opportunity to, her regional manager wanted to move her over and be the general manager of a store over here in San Luis Obispo. And that is not what I thought was coming to fruition in 2016. I thought after, running 335 and being 20th at nationals one year, having a 21.9 female long jumper and a 57.84 hurdler, and we had a really good group of kids. And in my mind, I'm like, I'm parlaying this into something big, right? I parlayed that into getting out of coaching temporarily. And it was, Valerie was moving up. I kind of felt like we were having a lot of success in the coaching world. I wouldn't say, for me professionally, kind of stagnated, but it was more that she was just moving so fast that, it's like, hey, we're going to follow her career and make this move, to San Luis Obispo.
So if you're a fan of the show, The Office, and I'm a huge fan of the show, The Office, Jim Halpert and his wife, he's trying to do his own career while she has her career, and she doesn't like him being out at his career, right? Like, she wants him back home. He's out in Philadelphia, and he changes his mind. He comes back home to be with his wife and the kids, and his boss says, Jim, I have friends that won't change their golf schedule for their wives, nevertheless come back, change their careers. Bap, I kind of have that same question for you. There's certainly non-coaches in my lives that would not change their golf schedule. All you coaches are awesome people, so you would, of course. But you make the decision to get out of coaching, which you have done at this point for
20 years.
No, 20. At that point?
Oh, at 20 total.
Yeah,
but Fresno State 11.
Yeah, but 20 total at that point. So you've been coaching for 20 years, and you decided to walk away to support not only your wife, but obviously your family at this point in time. What was going through your head?
Honestly, it was probably the toughest decision I made, in my career, because you work so hard and you think, hey, you hear it all the time, pay your dues, right? Pay your dues. Always just making moves, trying to do things that you felt like you're paying your dues and making sacrifices to get ahead in the coaching profession. And then here comes my wife, who, just moved up the ladder so quick. And it was just one of those things that it made sense for our family, the area, being on the Central Coast. And it was tough in the sense of like, I didn't know if I was going to coach again, because even while we're making this decision, I'm calling Cal Poly, I'm talking to athletic director, I'm talking to academic services, I'm talking everywhere on campus, trying to just stay in the CSU system, because of the retirement that was being built up and everything. And I was just trying to find my way on this campus. And when it was all said and done, there weren't really any opportunities at the time. And I just told my wife, I'm like, you know what? I'll figure out life. We'll figure it out together and let's go. So it was hard telling the team. It was hard walking away. And at the same time, 20 years isn't like there's some coaches coach for 40, 45 years. But 20 years for a lot of people in life is a career, right? And in a lot of institutions, a lot of different corporations. So I kind of looked at it from that perspective of like, hey, this 15, 16, if this is the way I'm going out, it was a good way to end it. And, I'm going to support my wife and do what's best for our family and make that move.
In America, it's very husband-centric careers and how you support the family, etc. Not in all families, but I would say in general. You took a very supportive role. I mean, first of all, I don't know if Val gave you the Husband of the Year award that year, because you're living life, so you maybe can't see it. But I mean, that is tough. Egotistically, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but there's ego there, there's pride. But to say, hey, what's best for our family? I mean, it's really, I guess when you boil down to it, it really is like the definition of husband and father and partnership of like, oh, well, I got to do what's best for the family, no matter what that is. And in that instance, what was best for the family and for the partnership was, hey, you're the one who's moving up here. This is best for our family for the future. Again, thinking long term. So I'll do the thing. I'll stop working at this job and we'll figure it out. What'd you say? You'll do life. You'll figure it out. You'll figure life out.
Well, and yeah, and I mean, and honestly, I mean, we talk about our relationship. I remember you challenged me one time, and you said, "Who is Chris Baptista?" Right? And I'm like, "I'm a track coach. I'm this. I'm naming all these different things." And you're like, "No, think about this. At the core, who are you?" And at that time in 2015, I was baptized, right? And we'd actually spent some time on a road in Albuquerque, going to church together, and that's later. Probably after about 2010, became a little bit more. Became an integral part of my life, my faith. But I remember that it was that question of who are you, right? And it's like, no, think about this. Like, hey, you're a child of God, right? You're a man of God. You're a father. You're more than a track coach. That's your coaching title. That's who you are professionally, but that's not who you are. And that was one of the things that really kind of helped me in understanding, like, you're right. And I'm not just a coach, and there is more to who I am, and there are more responsibilities in my life. And that really kind of helped us move down that path and make that decision a little bit easier. So yeah, your influence, it never goes away.
Yeah, I can be
in everything we do.
I can be very Confucius-like sometimes and just ask those questions. You think they're easy questions, and I'll just hit you with the right hook, like, who are you? The reason that's such a great question is because I look at myself every morning in the mirror and I'm like, who are you? What are you doing, man? So interestingly, you leave Fresno State, you move down to the San Luis Obispo area, correctly, right? Is that where you kind of moved into?
Actually, we moved to Morro Bay.
Right, Morro Bay, that's it. Yeah. And then you go to work for the University of Alabama. How does that work out? Because you're in California. What are we talking about here?
Yeah, so actually I had another job before that. I actually worked for Apria Healthcare. I was a hospital account manager, and I quickly realized that is not what I wanted to do. And I needed to somehow be around, the college lifestyle or athletics or whatever it might be. Everyone was kind of trying to help me kind of navigate that, right? Like, figuring out life. What are you? Hey, Bap, get a LinkedIn account, get as many followers as you can. Like, make sure you're, liking this, liking that, and like being involved, right? And create that network. And within that, I remember, kind of setting my profile and my job search, and recruiting, sales, all these different, kind of key terms. And there was a job that popped up. It was a match, and it was to be a regional admissions, counselor for University of Alabama. And I went after that job with everything I had, because when I read that description, I thought, man, this is all me. The California kid who grew up in California, who went to school in Alabama, even though it was UAB, sister school, but not UAT. So, it was kind of one of those things, like, growing up on the West Coast and culturally making that decision and moving to the South. I thought, man, this is right up my alley. And luckily I ended up getting that job, and it was very interesting. So I worked admissions. I lived in Morro Bay, and I was a remote admissions counselor. I had five counties that I were in my territory, most of it being, pretty heavy in Ventura and LA County, which is about, 2.5 hours south of here. But I enjoyed it. I was on the road. Go ahead.
Well, so not a lot of people know what this is. I didn't know what this was, and I worked in the university setting for 10 years of my life. So talk to us about what this is. I always describe it as you were a recruiter for the university. Now, we're in athletic land here on this podcast, right? We're talking about track and field. This has 0 or maybe 1%, but 99% of it does nothing to do with athletics at all. You're recruiting for the university in this 5-county territory in California. You're trying to get California students to come to the University of Alabama. Is that kind of what the job description was?
Yeah, 100%. And I'd even say like the 1% athletics that you had mentioned, maybe 1% athletics, wasn't even athletics. It was, it was the pipe dream of athletics for some people who might come up to you at a college fair, but yeah, it was not athletics at all. This is literally like admissions is big business, right? Around the country. And I mean, this was a well-oiled machine as far as how the admissions process and the recruitment worked. And yeah, I would basically, I mean, I'd go to college fairs. I would do high school presentations at the college and career centers, do personal meetings at a Starbucks or whatever it might be, at a restaurant, meeting with, students who are just trying to facilitate the admissions process, helping with applications, helping with essays. So it was, I mean, basically you're given a sales pitch, right? I mean, for the most part, you're going in and it's just recruitment. And you really start to understand like the target of these schools from around the country, like how they identify their prospective students, the merit money that's available and how they're recruiting people to come to their universities. And the part that was, I think the 1% athletics wasn't from a recruitment standpoint. It actually helped recruitment, meaning the applications on a given year, when Alabama would win national championship in football, applications are up by 10,000. When they didn't, they're down by 10,000. So you had a president of a university who really understood the value in the marketing and what the front door of the athletics brings to the university. And seeing those two entities mesh from that standpoint at a power like Alabama was pretty important, is influential for sure.
So the job was, it sounds like your same job as a track coach, but take away the coaching on the track aspect of it. So you're not trying to make an athlete go from 12 flat in the 100-meter dash to 11:28 in the 100-meter dash. You're recruiting for the university. So maybe a lot of the same pitches that you made as a track coach would be in the academic recruiting world, but then now change it to, you're really talking about your major and your test scores and maybe job placement afterwards. So how were you? So as a track coach, we measure how well you do based on like maybe your standing in conference. Like, did you go from 10th to 6th as a team? Did you continue to win the conference title? Did you get X amount of kids qualified for nationals? And then a lot of other subcategories, right? Like, what's your team GPA? Did you put no one in the police blotter for the weekend? Those kind of things. What was your metrics as was it an academic recruiter? Is that what your title was? Or what was
a regional admissions counselor, basically.
Oh, that's very fancy. That's good. So as a regional admissions counselor, what were your metrics? Like, how did they say, yep, Chris, you did a good job this month or this quarter? How were you measured, since you couldn't show speed? You couldn't make a kid jump farther. What was your metrics there?
Yeah, I mean, basically it was enrollment, right? I mean, it was who actually enrolled. So the applications was one metric. How many people from the territory applied to University of Alabama, and then also just, how many people enrolled. So there wasn't necessarily a quota or anything. I mean, there was definitely some metrics to say, hey, if we can, here's where you were last year, we'd like to be better than that. But it wasn't an end all be all, get this kid into school. I mean, you really were a counselor from that standpoint of like, you're selling this institution in this academic program. However, you were also a counselor in the sense that you had to help people make the decision of what was the right fit for them as well, right? So, I mean, if you had a student who this is where they wanted to go, and when it was all said and done, I mean, they still had a $15,000 gap, and they were, every day the conversation was like, I don't know how I'm going to pay for that. Like, you didn't just convince to push that kid through admissions and then all of a sudden they're stuck, and then transferring out, half, semester or a year later, even in the admissions, from a general university standpoint, because again, that's a retention issue, right? That's when you look at how schools get ranked from, what their academic profile, their retention rates between freshman year, sophomore, junior year, their graduation success rates. That's all important in the athletic world and in the admissions world as well.
As you were going through the interview process, there was something that really stuck out to me and actually aggravated the ever living snot out of me. And I'm glad we don't know who this person is. I wouldn't want to name shame them anyway, but you had, I'm not even going to put it on you. They had a idea of who you were, meaning, oh, this person was an athletic coach. They don't understand the academic side. So I remember you telling me stories of during the interviews, they would ask you questions or, reiterate the point 1,000 times. Well, you know what? This isn't athletic recruiting. This isn't recruiting for the football team, Chris. This isn't recruiting for the track team. This is different. And it was so frustrating when you were telling me stories, because it was like, do they not know how we live as track and field coaches? Certainly there is the on the track aspect. You're right. You have to know your X's and O's, but you have to live and breathe and represent your university to a very high level, because the competition level that you're up against is high. So you've really got to sell the school and yourself. And they were almost like it was like they thought you couldn't do the job because you had been a track coach. Like, you don't understand recruiting, Chris Baptista.
Yeah, and that was one of the things, definitely lended to my strength in that role, right? Is the recruiting side of it. It's all it is like you said, you're taking the X's and O's out, and that's it. You're being there, you're there to counsel and listen to somebody, you're there to help guide them, right, make the right decisions. It's the same thing in the athletic world. I'm recruiting a sprinter from Ventura High School. It's part of the process. Like, hey, I would love for that. This might be the number one kid that I want, and I'm going to do everything I can to sell our institution to get that kid. But at the same time, if I only have so much aid that I can give that kid, and they have a gap and they're really wondering how they're going to make it work, and they've got to come up with 10, 15,000 a year, and they're going to be worried about taking out loans or having to get a job, and I'm not going to have their full attention, they might struggle when they get here. So again, I think the value of what we do from a recruitment standpoint in the athletic world definitely carries over to the admissions world.
And that's what was frustrating, is that these individuals from the academic side, the school side, could not see that an athletic coach, and specifically a track and field coach in this example, if you take away the track and you take away the office paperwork, what does a track coach do? They recruit student athletes. They recruit alumni. There's alumni support, right? And what you do there, you recruit some schools, you're recruiting fundraising, local businesses. You are doing the job that you were interviewing, but then also had to coach a kid on the track. It was just very frustrating, the level of downgrade that they gave you as a track coach in this interviewing process. And really, at the end of the day, here's what I love about it. At the end of the day, you got the job. So you really proved to them how good of a recruiter you were, and what track coaches do in the realm of their job, from coaching and recruiting, et cetera, is like, yeah, all those doubts you have about me. And guess what? You still hired me. I still proved to you my worth in this profession, in this job specifically. So,
and I will say, I beat the metrics from the year before, and we had more people go to Alabama.
Exactly. No doubts was that happen. It was a no. It was, as you talked about. You read the job description and you're like, oh, this is a no brainer. It's coaching track without coaching. It's all the other aspects here. Come on, man, let's do it.
Well, and you can find a way to be competitive in that too, right? There's, just like with any industry, you can find a way to let that competitive spirit in you come out, and have those metrics to identify that success.
And so during this time, you're doing a great job with this job. Is there any, I asked earlier about when Karen was coaching the jumps and you were coaching the sprints, and you're a jumper, you kind of side eye what's going on, keeping your eyes over there while you're doing this job as the what'd you call it again? The regional academic advisor?
Regional admissions counselor.
Admissions counselor. That's right. I knew there was no academic. Regional admissions counselor. Were you keeping your eye on track and coaching and jobs that are opening? Were you still kind of like, man, I'm still coach. I just happen to be doing another job right now?
I think I lost you.
Oh, can you hear me now? He's got these iPhone things in his head, so I think the battery went and died on him. Well, you're on mute now. You're on mute. See, when we start
Can you hear me now?
now I can hear you. When we start
You're bubbly.
it's your iPhones are dead.
Well, let
Can
me
you hear?
go off.
All right, good. Yeah,
I got you now. I
can you
got
hear
you
me?
now.
All right.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Before we start every podcast, we tell every guest that we strive for authenticity over perfection. I don't edit. I ain't cutting that out. You just had to have heard that and moved on, right? So when you were doing this regional admissions counselor for University of Alabama, and you're doing a great job, were you keeping kind of a side eye for coaching jobs and things like that? Were you still like, I'm a coach, I just happen to be doing something else right now?
No, so actually during that time, I was volunteering at Templeton High School with Don Crow, who was a former, he was a Fresno State guy, and then was involved. He's even been involved around here at Cal Poly a little bit, just as far as this community goes. But I was volunteering with him, and then I actually did a Learn by Doing clinic with Terry Crawford and them down in Arizona. So a little bit of stuff with the USATF. And so that was kind of keeping my foot in the door, I guess, if you would, but I wasn't necessarily looking for jobs, and meaning like, I wasn't going through the NCAA or USTF CCCA list and saying, hey, what's out there? Like, I got to get into coaching, right? I kind of felt like that was kind of keeping my foot in the door from that standpoint and indulging that side of who I was. I thought maybe I, get involved, personal train some kids, that would kind of fulfill that side of me. All said and done, I think when it came down to it, it was just a matter of, the opportunity that presented itself at Cal Poly that really, opened that door and kind of had me think more down this path again.
So there's a famous fax from Michael Jordan. After he finished his baseball stint, he faxed back to the Bulls, and it was just a 2-word fax that said, "I'm back." Similarly, I can remember the day Bap called me about the Cal Poly position, partly because I was on the beautiful campus of Troy University. I happened to be visiting, and I get a phone call from Bap. Nothing out of the ordinary at this point. That's a pretty normal thing. And I answer the phone, and I think I even went right into, dude, I'm at the most beautiful campus in the world, Troy University, blah, 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 my normal Troy shtick here, right? And he says, hey, man, would it surprise you if I got back into coaching? Now, you had been out for how long at this point?
Almost a year and a half.
So it's about a year and a half, going on 2 years. You're doing very well at Alabama. The family is gelling into where you are now with mom at the job, and the kids growing up and getting into sports, things like life is moving forward this way. So he calls me up. Would it surprise you if I got back into coaching? And I was like, absolutely not. Just as long as you do it differently, maybe this time, knowing that, family and everything. So Cal Poly comes Cal calling. How did this come around? That was a terrible joke. Did you hear that joke? I said that Cal called. Yeah, that was terrible. But how did Cal Poly come around?
Yeah, so I actually was at a college fair in Bakersfield, and Mark Conover had called me at the time and said, hey, I just want to kind of pick your brain a little bit. And I'd hung around. I came over here and stood around Danny Williams a little bit, had lunch with Jeannie Ashcroft a couple times, and like I said, Mark and I actually tried to work something out from a part-time standpoint, early on. And then when I got the Alabama job, I'm like, nah, that'd be a conflict of interest. I can't recruit there and, be part-time here. So, I kind of walked away from it at that time. When he called, I was at a college fair, and I said, well, I'm in the middle of the fair right now. Let me call you back. And of course, in the admissions world, going from one school, especially like LA, when I'm not from LA, driving from one school to the next presentation, I got 2 hours to get there, possible LA traffic. I've got my navigation on. We were kind of having these conversations over a 2-3 day period while I was in Los Angeles, and really not able to have the conversation because I'm like, I need to be on my GPS. I need to know where I'm going. And a couple times when we had talked, we had enough time to talk about what I did with Alabama, what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it. Most of it was what I liked about it. There was some freedom. I was coaching my kids' soccer team. I was coaching flag football. I worked Monday through Thursday, right? And not always down in LA. I mean, I probably traveled no more than somebody who's got, going all the way through the Olympic trials in a season, maybe 50 nights on the road a year. But I had enough time after, a couple phone calls, and I said, no, I'm in a good place. My family's in a good place. This is working out for us. And we had the phone call a couple times. And I said, you know what, let's get together when I come back into town. Let's talk about this when I can kind of have everything off my plate, get done with my week, come back into town. And so we scheduled, a phone call, talked a little bit more about the opportunity. I said, okay, you know what? Let me talk with my wife. And he said, well, in the meantime, how about your wife and my wife? Let's all go to dinner. So we scheduled dinner and talked a little bit more. And the biggest thing for me at the time in that conversation, like you said, doing it differently now that you have a family, right? The biggest part of the conversation for me at the time was, I have two kids. My wife's working full time. We came here for her job. It's an opportunity for me to get back into coaching, potentially, if I, go down this path. What does that look like in trying to help be almost a primary caregiver with the family and help balance this out while allowing her to fulfill kind of her destiny with her job, her requirements. And that flexibility piece was probably the biggest thing that really helped me make that decision to get back in. Because it is demanding, I was talking with the coach a couple months ago, and we had just come back from Hawaii, and he goes, man, you're on vacation? And I'm like, yeah, it's actually second vacation this summer. And it's like, man, I wish I could go on vacation. And in my mind, I'm sitting there like, well, why can't you? Right? Like this work-life balance and what we do, and you can be successful in any environment without it being 24/7. Like you can be successful. And that was probably one of the biggest things for me in deciding to pursue this opportunity was, Mark's got triplets. So he understands what it means, from a family perspective. And so that was a very important step for me in the process of deciding to pursue the Cal Poly job.
And how long have you been at Cal Poly now?
So I'll cross the 4-year threshold here in about another 2 weeks.
So how's that going? And what I mean by that is you talk about doing it differently, and we need to make that more the standard here. People, head coaches that not just allow your assistant coaches to live their lives and their family lives and vacations and things like that, but almost demand it. Because remember earlier we talked about Bap going to Shasta and living in his Jeep in the track shack. I mean, that's not healthy. It's not healthy long-term, and it's even not healthy short-term. It definitely gave you some traits that you grew off of, but it was not healthy in that time frame. So you come into the Cal Poly situation. Mark is very supportive of family and family first, maybe even in that statement. 4 years down the line, how have you been keeping family first while it's still a job, so you still got to do it and do it well?
Yeah. So, for the most part, it's the flexibility and the schedule on the track is part of it. I start after 8:30 on the track and I'm done before 2:30. So I'm not a typical, most of my career, typically practice in the afternoon, 2 to 5, kind of in that range, 1 to 5, 1 to 6. So, the schedule lends itself to getting kids to school, picking them up. Even during the COVID situation, my kids were in a tent at the track, right? Doing remote learning. They each had their own tent. And that's kind of where I had them doing their remote learning. Sometimes it wasn't always the best situation and kind of lose sight. I'd get a text from a teacher saying, hey, where's Camden? He missed his meeting. And I'd look around and sure enough, he's not in the tent, and have to tell the kids on the team, hey, give me a couple minutes to be right back. And walk over, and sure enough, he's over on the football sideline watching practice. So I'd call a teacher or send her a text back. I'm like, oh, he's all right. he's not lost. He's just watching football practice today. So some education and life skills, right? And just not necessarily in the classroom there, but he, just having the kids at the track with me, and I mean, we just found a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, as we kind of go down this path and we think about like the flexibility, the opportunities, the family time. We travel to Oklahoma 2 or 3 times a year because that's where my wife's family's from, obviously. You just learn to prioritize that and figure out a way to make it work, right? I mean, I think I was kind of getting in this mode even at Fresno my last few years, to where, I'm not sending out 1,000 and 1,500 questionnaires and filtering through all the questionnaires. I'm going through and specifically looking for kids that I want to target recruiting, whether they've ever shown interest in us or not. And I'm targeting those kids. And then after, I might start with 25, 30 of them. And after I spend my time really investing my time and trying to identify the markers, I funnel that down and I'm recruiting probably 8 to 10 kids. And so within that, I'm really getting to know 8 to 10 kids that I'm recruiting, and not making 30 phone calls a night, which some coaches still do. And they think that's how, and for them, I mean, and that's great if that's how they do it and how they build their programs. But I've learned you can really have a good, healthy balance and still build a successful program without it just being 24/7. And with that, yeah, I mean, coaching sprints, hurdles, and jumps here. I had a triple jumper that won my first year in the conference meet. I think we scored 1 point in the short hurdles, 0 in the 4 hurdles. This was women's side. No one in the finals of the 1, no one in the finals of the 2, scored 1 point in the 4. Scored maybe 4 points in the 8. Relays were last. And so we might have scored 16 points, sprints, hurdles, and jumps. This last year, we scored 83 points in those areas, and we won the Big West title, first Big West title in women's history at Cal Poly.
Wow.
And the highest points scored, 183, I think it was, or 180 something, highest point differential in point score in the last 7 years. So again, like you said, how are you doing it, right? You can be successful and still have a family, a life family balance, or in a good working relationship, and that's, we take advantage of our area for sure, as a family too.
Absolutely. And that is one of the major reasons why I wanted you on the podcast. Besides, you're my brother, and I think your journey is important and other people should hear it. But, that aspect of your coaching career, these last 6, 7, 8 years, if you will, it's important for people to see. You hit the nail on the head when you said the word priorities, right? And definitely your priorities change, right? Like when you went to Shasta, your priorities were different at that point than they are today at Cal Poly, and where you are in your life, your age and stage, marriage status, children status, all that has changed. So definitely your priorities change, but it's good to see that. I always hesitate saying the work-life balance, right? But because I'm not exactly a great example of that in myself and my position here, but knowing that your priorities can and should be on faith and family and friends and your job, but they have to be ranked correctly. And that doesn't mean that on any one day that the job isn't the number one priority because it's a track meet or something like that. But it's when it's the number one priority 365 days a year, I think we can run into some problems. And it's not just problems for ourselves, it's problems with our spouses and our families, and even with our job satisfaction at that point. So it's really important for people to see what you've done, how you've continued to evolve in your personal life as it relates to your professional life, and how you're achieving success with that. It's not like it's family first and now, he has 1 kid and scores 1 point. Like, no, there's still development with the athletes that you recruit. You're just doing it differently, and that differently comes with success as well. And so that's important for people to see.
Well, yeah, and that's one of those things I remember, like you said, when we talked about that, and it's like, hey, if you get back in, you do it differently, right? Part of that was the financing of programs, the part of that was the family time. I mean, there was so much that went into that. And I think that's one of those things I can look back and, I mean, I don't know how many people, I'm sure there's a lot that had to do it, but I mean, taking their kids to the track, during COVID and everything else. fortunately, that also has parlayed itself into a situation for our family that's, assisting me to continue growing as a coach and building a program. And we talk about the sacrifices, right, that our families make. And, Valerie's made that sacrifice for our family with her job now, knowing that those kids were, maybe that wasn't the best situation for them, but that is what we were dealt during COVID, was them sitting in a tent at the track and learning and running around the football field and doing everything else. So with that, she's kind of put her, career on hold now again to allow me to focus on this and not have to babysit during practice and everything. And so that's something I'm really, blessed and thankful for sure.
Yeah, you certainly are. Knowing both of you, it takes both, right? I talked about earlier, where it's in America, it's traditionally a patriarchal, right? Is that the right word? Remember, I did go to school at Troy, so I'm not sure my vocabulary words are right, but male dominated in the profession for the family, and then Val became that breadwinner, if you will, and now it's revert. But what, I love that, because that's the very definition of people working together. It's like, sometimes I need you to lead here, and you know what, sometimes I have to lead over here, and sometimes I have to make this sacrifice, and other times you're going to have to make the sacrifice. That's what a great relationship, a great team does, and you guys are just an amazing example of that.
Well, appreciate that. Had good guidance.
You'll have to share that guidance with me one day. Whatever I give, I completely expect to get back, because I will need it one day. Batman, as we wrap up today, man, I'm just so thankful for you being here today. We planned this for quite a while. I think we did a really good job of keeping the inside jokes to a minimum, man. I'm proud of us for that alone, that we were able to keep this in a broad term and really provide value to the listeners today. The sacrifices you made, not really coming from a track coach focused life, meaning it's not like your whole high school and college career is burning like, I'm going to be a track coach, that you found that passion as you went through your career. Those are important things for people to see. Your journey is important, and I'm just so thankful and humbled that you'd be here to share it with us today.
Well, like I said, I'm blessed to know you and all the guidance I've gotten from you, our relationship, and how we've, gotten to know each other over the years, and always thankful for what you do for me and our family as well. So love you, brother. And thanks for the opportunity to be on the show with you.
Absolutely, man. Thank you, man. Really, again, just so appreciative. And thank you for being here listening today. Your time is valuable, and you continue to join us week after week, and people keep joining. Maybe this is the first time you have been here today, hearing today's story with Chris Baptista. Go back. There's a great back catalog. We mentioned some of the people in his life and our lives that we've had, from Ron Grigg, and we're going to have Boo Schexnader, another guy that I don't know how we missed this guy in our story, but Diego Flocker, who's now at University of Miami. He's been on the podcast. Great backlog for you to go and check out. Some great people, men and women from every level of track and field, that have been on the show. And who knows, maybe you'll be on the show one day. You never know. So thanks for being here today. If you received value, I bet someone in your network would receive value as well. So share it. Email, text message, TikTok. This guy over here has none of that. Normally I'd say like, hey, Bap, where can people hit you up on Twitter and Facebook? He has none of that. He is off the grid, people. He barely has a cell phone today, right? I don't know how I got him on Zoom. I didn't think he was going to be able to make it. He almost didn't. But share it with your network and give value to others. So until next time, come back and we'll do it all over again. Have a good one.